Hi everybody, it's Program Ranger Shay with Capital Area Council here at beautiful Camp Tom in Bastrop, Texas. Today we are reading a really cool book called Planting the Trees of Kenya. This is by Claire Onavola, and it is the story of Wangari Maathai. As Wangari Maathai tells it, when she was growing up on a farm in the hills of central Kenya, the earth was cloaked in its dress of green. Fig trees, olive trees, crotons, and flame trees covered the land, and the fish filled the pure waters of the streams. The fig tree was sacred then, and Wangari knew not to disturb it, not even to carry its fallen branches home for firewood. In the stream near her homestead, where she went to collect water for her mother, she played with glistening frog eggs and trying to gather them into beads into necklaces, though they slipped through her fingers back into the clear water. Her heart was filled with the beauty of her native Kenya when she left to attend college, run by Benedictine nuns in America, far, far away from her home. There she studied biology, the science of living things. It was an inspiring time for Wangari. The students of America in those years dreamed of making the world better. The nuns, too, thought it, and Wangari, too, they taught her to think not just for herself, but for the world beyond herself. How eagerly she returned to Kenya. How full of hope and all that she had learned. There she is in the college in America. She had been away for 5 years, only 5 years, but they might have been 20. So damaged was the landscape of Kenya. Wangari found the fig tree cut down, the little stream all dried up, and no trace of frogs, tadpoles, or silvery beads of eggs. Or once there had been little farms growing that each family needed to live on, and large plantations growing tea for export. Now almost all the farms were growing crops to sell. Wangari noticed that the people no longer grew what they ate, but bought food from stores. The store food was expensive, and the little they could afford was not good for them as they had been as good for them as what they had grown for themselves. So that children, even grown-ups, were weaker and often sickly. So they don't have the gardens in for their little house anymore, and they have to go to the store, and the food at the store is not as good as what they grew in the garden. She saw that there once had been richly wooded hills with grazing cows and goats. Now the land was almost treeless, and the woods were gone. So many trees had been cut down to clear a way for more farms that women and children had to walk farther and farther to search for firewood, to heat a pot, or to warm the house. Sometimes they walked for hours before they found a tree or a bush to cut down. There were fewer and fewer trees with each one they cut, and much of the land was as bare as a desert. Without trees, there were no roots to hold the soil in place. Without trees, there was no shade, and the rich topsoil dried to dust, and the devil winds blew it away. Rain washed the loose earth into the once clear streams and rivers and dirtied them with their silt. So there's no more topsoil because there's no roots of the trees to hold that soil in. And now the streams are all dirty with silt instead of clear and blue. We have no clean drinking water, the women of the countryside complain. No firewood to cook with. Our goats and cows have nothing to graze on, so they have little milk. Our children are hungry, and we are poorer than before. When Gari saw that the people who had once honored fig trees now cut them down and had forgotten to care for the land that fed them, now the land, weak and suffering, could no longer take care of the people, and their lives became harder than ever. The women blamed others. They blamed the government. But Wangari was not one to complain. She wanted to do something. Think of what we ourselves are doing, she urged the women. We are cutting down the trees of Kenya. When we see that we are part of the problem, she said, we can become part of the solution. She had a simple but big idea. Why not plant trees? She asked the woman. She showed them how to collect the tree seeds from the trees that still remained. She taught them how to prepare the soil, mixing it with manure. She showed them how to wet that soil and press a hole in it with a stick and carefully insert a seed. Most of all, she taught them to tend the growing seedlings as if they were like babies, watering them twice a day to make sure that they were strong. It wasn't easy. Water was always hard to come by. Often the women had to dig a hole, a deep hole, by hand and climb into it to haul out heavy buckets of water over their heads and back out of the hole. An early nursery in Wangari's backyard failed. It didn't work. Almost all the seedlings died, but Wangari was not one to give up, and she showed others not to give up. Many of the women could not read or write. They were mothers and farmers, and no one took them very seriously. But they did not need schooling to plant trees. They did not have to wait for the government to help them. They could begin to change their own lives. All this was heavy work, but the women felt very proud. Slowly, all of them, they could begin to see the fruit of their work, of their hands. The woods were growing back up again, and now, when they cut down a tree, they planted two in its place. Their families were healthier, eating from fruit trees they had planted and from vegetable plots filled again with yams and cassava, pigeon peas, and sorghum that grew so well. They had work to do, and the work brought them closer together as one, like the trees growing together in the newly wooded hills. The men saw that their wives and mothers and daughters were doing and admired them and even joined in. Wangari gave seedlings to the schools and taught the children how to make their own nurseries. She gave seedlings to inmates of prisons and even to soldiers. You hold a gun, she told the soldiers, but what are you protecting? The whole country is disappearing with the wind and the water. You should hold a gun in your right hand and a tree seedling in your left. That's when you become a good soldier. And so, in 30 years since Wangari began her movement, tree by tree, person by person, 30 million trees have been planted in Kenya, and the planting has not stopped. Oh, I'm getting bit by fire ants. Texas, Texas. When the soil is exposed, Wangari tells us, it is crying out for help, and it is naked and needs to be clothed in its dress. That is the nature of the land. It needs color. It needs its cloth of green. The end. Pretty amazing what one person started. Thank you for joining me today with a story about Kenya and planting trees. We hope that you will do your best to make a difference in the world. Stay safe. Happy scouting.